Today, we're traveling back to the Middle Ages to uncover medieval products that flopped hard, confused everyone, or were downright impractical, yet somehow survived long enough to become part of our modern lives. From bizarre designs to ideas that were centuries ahead of their time, these medieval failures proved that being bad at first doesn't mean disappearing forever. Some were laughed at, others abandoned, and then quietly resurrected hundreds of years later. So if you enjoy strange history, forgotten inventions, and surprising connections between the medieval world and your everyday life, you're in the right place. Hit like, subscribe for more calm, fascinating history, and let me know in the comments which invention surprised you the most, or which one you think should stay buried in the past. And when you're done, check out the other videos on the channel for more unbelievable stories history forgot. Now, let's step into the Middle Ages and see which failures refused to die. Before we can talk about medieval products that failed, we need to slow down and unlearn something very modern. Today, when a product fails, it disappears fast. It gets recalled, reviewed badly, mocked online, and replaced within months. A failed product becomes a lesson in a business textbook or a trivia answer no one really cares about. Failure is loud, public, and final. In the medieval world, failure was none of those things. Imagine a village in the 1200s. There is no brand loyalty, no customer service desk, no instruction manual folded inside a box. Most people have never seen an alternative version of anything they use. If a product hurts you, smells bad, breaks quickly, or simply does not work very well, that does not automatically mean it gets abandoned. Often it means you shrug, adjust, and keep using it anyway. Failure in the medieval world was quiet. There was no mass production. Every object was made slowly, by hand, usually by someone you knew personally. If your candle smoked, your shoes hurt your feet, or your cookware made you sick, there was no competing product across the street promising better results. There was just the same object, made again next time, more or less the same way. This meant products rarely failed all at once. Instead, they failed in specific ways, socially, medically, religiously, symbolically. A product might work perfectly well in theory, but fail because it offended religious beliefs. Another might do exactly what it was meant to do, but slowly damaged the body over years. Some products failed simply because people believed they should work, even when they clearly did not. And belief mattered far more than results. Authority played a huge role. If a respected craftsman, physician, monk, or noble endorsed a product, that endorsement could outweigh lived experience. Pain, discomfort, or illness were often blamed on the body, the soul, or fate, not on the object itself. If something caused harm, it was rarely the product's fault. It was bad humors, weak constitution, God's will. In this world, failure did not disqualify an object. It merely became part of its identity. Another key difference is habit. Medieval life was deeply repetitive. People wore the same types of clothes their parents wore. They ate the same foods, cooked the same way, lit their homes the same way. Products survived because they were familiar. Even if they were flawed, they were known. And known things feel safer than unknown improvements. There was also the problem of alternatives. Often, there simply were none. If your toothpaste damaged your gums, the alternative was not better toothpaste. It was no toothpaste at all. If your lighting filled your room with smoke, the alternative was darkness. If your cookware slowly poisoned you, the alternative was not cooking. So many medieval products existed in a strange middle ground. Not good enough to be called successes. Not bad enough to be abandoned. They lingered, and this lingering is important, because lingering allows change. Medieval products were not static. They were adjusted, reinterpreted, and repurposed over generations. A product could fail in its original form, yet survive as an idea. The idea would pass quietly through time, changing just enough to remain useful. This is why so many medieval failures still sit in our homes today. They are no longer medieval in form, but they are medieval in spirit. When we talk about failure in this documentary, we are not talking about inventions that vanished. We are talking about objects that refused to die. Objects that should have been abandoned, but instead were tolerated, trusted, or simply endured long enough to evolve. There is also something deeply human here. Medieval people were practical, but they were also patient in a way we are not. Pain did not always signal a problem to be solved. Discomfort was often expected. Life itself was uncomfortable. A product that caused minor harm might still be considered acceptable if it fit into the rhythms of daily life. and daily life was hard. This meant expectations were lower. A product did not need to be safe, efficient, or pleasant. It just needed to exist, to do something, to offer the illusion of control in a world filled with uncertainty. Many products failed because they promised more than they could deliver. Protection from disease, cleanliness, comfort, security. These promises mattered, even when they were false. In some cases, the promise was more important than the result. A lock that could be easily broken still made people feel safer. A perfume that smelled overpowering still made people feel protected from illness. A medical tool that caused harm still offered hope. And hope is a powerful thing. So when we say a medieval product failed, we do not mean it was rejected. We mean it did not do what people thought it did, or it did so badly, or at such a cost, that by modern standards it should never have survived. But it did, because failure, in the medieval world, was not the end of a story. It was just another chapter. As we move forward, keep this idea in mind. Every object we will explore was once flawed, misunderstood, or quietly dangerous. And yet, somehow, it made the long journey from smoky workshops and candlelit homes into our modern lives, not as a success, but as a survivor. If you had lived in the medieval world and worried about your teeth, you would already be in trouble. Not because people ignored dental care. Quite the opposite. Medieval people cared deeply about their teeth. A clean mouth was associated with health, discipline, and even moral character. Bad breath was not just unpleasant, it was sometimes seen as a sign of internal rot, spiritual imbalance, or sickness creeping upward from the stomach. The problem was not the intention, it was the toothpaste. Medieval toothpaste was usually called tooth powder, and the ingredients list reads less like a hygiene product and more like the remains of a campfire. Crushed animal bones, burnt oyster shells, charcoal, ash from hardwood fires, sometimes chalk, occasionally salt, all ground into a fine powder and rubbed directly onto the teeth and gums. Technically, it worked. These powders scraped away plaque and surface stains. Teeth would often look whiter afterward. The mouth might even feel cleaner for a short time. By medieval standards, this counted as success. But the damage was slow and brutal. These powders were extremely abrasive. They did not just clean the teeth, they scraped them down. Enamel, once lost, does not grow back. Over years of daily use, medieval tooth powders wore teeth thinner and thinner, exposing sensitive inner layers. Gums receded, teeth loosened, pain became normal, and still, people kept using them. Part of the reason was visibility. Tooth decay was obvious. Blackened, rotting teeth were easy to see and smell. Enamel loss, on the other hand, happened gradually. When pain arrived, it was blamed on aging, bad humors, or weakness of the body. The powder was rarely suspected. Another reason was logic. From a medieval perspective, scraping made sense. Dirt was removed by friction. Rust was removed by scraping. Pots were cleaned with sand. Why should teeth be different? The idea that gentleness mattered simply did not exist yet. There was also tradition. Many tooth powder recipes were copied directly from ancient Roman and Greek texts. Authority mattered more than evidence. If a respected medical source recommended crushed bone or shell, that recommendation carried weight for centuries. And then there was habit. Dental pain was common regardless of toothpaste use. Sugar consumption was lower than today, but diets were still rough on teeth. Bread often contained grit from stone mills. Wine was acidic. Medical care was limited. Against this background, tooth powder did not seem unusually harmful. It was simply part of life. In some cases, these powders were even seen as protective. Strong ingredients were believed to drive away decay, worms, or bad spirits thought to live inside the teeth. A burning sensation meant the powder was working. Pain was proof of effectiveness. This is where the failure becomes clear. Medieval toothpaste failed as a long-term health product. It caused damage while pretending to prevent it. But it succeeded culturally. It gave people something to do, a ritual, a sense of care and control. And that ritual mattered. People passed recipes down within families. Apothecaries sold special blends. Wealthier households added herbs or spices to improve the taste. Poorer people used whatever ash was available. Everyone participated. Over time, small adjustments were made. Some powders became slightly less abrasive. Some added mint or fennel for freshness. But the core idea remained the same, cleaning through abrasion. That idea never went away. When modern toothpaste began to emerge centuries later, the form changed, but the logic survived. abrasive particles were still included. The difference was scale and control. Modern toothpaste uses carefully measured abrasives designed to polish rather than destroy enamel. But the concept is medieval. We still scrub our teeth. We still believe friction equals cleanliness. The medieval failure did not disappear. It evolved quietly, softened by chemistry and science, but carrying the same basic belief forward. There is also something strangely human about this failure. Medieval people were trying to solve a real problem with the tools they had. They were not careless. They were practical within their understanding of the body. From their perspective, a product that made teeth look cleaner and feel smoother was doing its job. Long-term damage was invisible and abstract. Immediate results mattered more. This mindset appears again and again in medieval products. Short-term improvement, long-term harm, a pattern that repeats. Even today, we still struggle with this balance. Whitening products that weaken enamel, overbrushing, harsh treatments marketed as solutions. We like results we can see, even if they cost us later. So when you squeeze toothpaste onto your brush tonight, you are participating in a very old experiment. One that began with bone dust and ash. One that caused pain, loose teeth, and broken gums. A failure, by medieval standards, would have been something abandoned. This was not abandoned, it was refined. And that refinement only happened because people endured the failure long enough to notice it. In the quiet of medieval mornings, people scrubbed their teeth by firelight, wincing, bleeding, trusting that this small discomfort was better than the alternative. They did not know they were laying the groundwork for a product that would survive for 1,000 years. They only knew that clean teeth felt better than dirty ones. And sometimes, that was enough. If you could step into a medieval bathhouse, the first thing you would notice is the smell. Not the pleasant kind. Not fresh, not clean. It would be heavy, oily, sometimes sharp, sometimes strangely sweet. And very often, it would not smell like soap at all. That is because, for much of the medieval period, soap, as we understand it, barely existed. Medieval soap was usually a rough mixture of animal fat and lye. Lye came from wood ash soaked in water, creating a harsh alkaline liquid. When combined with fat, it could create something vaguely soap-like. Sometimes it cleaned, sometimes it did nothing, sometimes it burned. The chemistry was inconsistent. No one measured exact ratios. Recipes varied wildly from place to place, and even batch to batch. One bar might dissolve grease. The next might leave a sticky film on your skin. Another might irritate your eyes and crack your hands. By modern standards, this is a failed product. But in the medieval world, the idea of soap itself was already controversial. Many people believed that washing too much was dangerous. Water was thought to open the pores, allowing illness to enter the body. Soap, being strong and harsh, was believed to weaken the skin's natural defenses. Cleanliness was not automatically associated with health. In some circles, it was associated with vanity, softness, or moral decay. This meant soap failed socially before it even failed chemically. For the poor, soap was also expensive. Animal fat was valuable. Wood ash took time to collect and process. A good bar of soap was not something you wasted on daily washing. It was used sparingly, often reserved for laundry rather than bodies. Clothes mattered more than skin. Many medieval people believed that clean clothes protected the body better than washing the body itself. Linen shirts were worn under outer garments and changed frequently. Dirt, sweat, and oil were expected to transfer to the cloth. The body beneath stayed, theoretically, safe and dry. Soap, in this system, was not essential. It was optional, and sometimes suspicious. When people did use soap on their bodies, the experience was often unpleasant. Early soaps stripped oils aggressively. Skin felt tight, dry, and irritated afterward. In cold climates, this discomfort could last for days, so people adapted. They used water alone, or sand, or cloth, or herbs rubbed directly on the skin. Soap became something used occasionally, carefully, and often with hesitation. And yet, soap never disappeared. Because despite all its failures, it did something nothing else quite did. It removed grease. Medieval life was greasy. Cooking fats, animal oils, soot from fires, work with hands and tools. Water alone struggled with this kind of dirt. Soap, even bad soap, could cut through it. This made soap valuable in certain contexts. Laundry, butchery, textile work, cleaning tools. These uses kept soap alive, even as its role in personal hygiene remained limited. There was also status involved. In some regions, especially parts of southern Europe and the Islamic world, better soap existed. Olive oil-based soaps were gentler and more reliable. These soaps were often imported and expensive. Using them signaled wealth, education, and connection to the wider world. So soap also became symbolic. It was not just about cleanliness, it was about refinement, civilization, being above the roughness of everyday life. But for most people, soap remained a half-failure, useful but uncomfortable, necessary but mistrusted. And this is where the medieval failure quietly carried forward. The idea that soap cleans by being harsh stuck around for a very long time. Even centuries later, people believed that soap had to sting, strip, or dry the skin to be effective. Mildness was associated with weakness. If it did not hurt a little, how could it be working? This belief echoes into modern times. Think of the soaps that promise to kill everything, the ones that leave your hands dry and cracked, the ones that smell aggressively clean. That mindset has medieval roots. Modern soap is chemically precise, balanced, designed to clean without damage. But the core idea remains the same: fat and alkali working together to remove grease. The medieval version failed because it lacked control. No understanding of pH, no consistency, no concern for skin health. It solved one problem while creating several others, but it survived because it solved an important problem imperfectly. And imperfect solutions tend to linger. There is also a deeper cultural failure here. Medieval soap failed to align with medieval beliefs about the body. Cleanliness, in a moral sense, mattered more than physical cleanliness. Inner purity mattered more than surface hygiene. Soap could not compete with prayer, fasting, or clean linen in that hierarchy. So it waited. It stayed in workshops, in laundries, in the margins of daily life, quietly useful, quietly irritating, quietly present, until ideas changed. When beliefs about disease, the body, and cleanliness shifted, soap was ready. The product itself did not need to be invented again. It only needed to be improved and reinterpreted. That is the strange fate of many medieval failures. They do not disappear. They wait. So tonight, when you wash your hands without thinking, using something that smells pleasant and feels gentle, you are using the descendant of a product that once burned skin, raised suspicion, and failed to convince people it was safe. Soap did not succeed in the medieval world. It endured it. And endurance, as we are slowly learning, can matter more than success. When the sun went down in the medieval world, life did not stop. It just became harder. Light was precious. Darkness was not romantic. It was thick, dangerous, and inconvenient. So people relied on candles, even when those candles were, frankly, awful. Most medieval households did not use beeswax candles. Beeswax was clean-burning, steady, and relatively pleasant. It was also expensive. Bees had to be kept, wax had to be harvested, and churches claimed much of the supply for religious use. For ordinary people, beeswax was a luxury. What most people used instead was tallow. Tallow candles were made from rendered animal fat, usually from cows or sheep. The process was simple. Melt the fat, strain it, pour it around a wick, and let it harden. The result was a candle that technically worked, and failed in almost every other way. Tallow candles smoked heavily. They sputtered. They dripped greasy fat onto floors, tables, and hands. Worst of all, they smelled as the fat burned. It released a thick, meaty odor that clung to rooms, clothing, and hair. Lighting a tallow candle did not make a space feel cozy. It made it feel alive in the wrong way. The smell was strongest in warm rooms, crowded homes, and poorly ventilated spaces, which describes most medieval homes. After an evening of candlelight, a room could smell like a butcher's shop that had caught fire. And yet, people used them anyway, because the alternative was darkness. Candles were not meant to be pleasant. They were meant to be useful. They allowed cooking after sunset, reading, prayer, work, socializing. Without them, the night swallowed everything. From a comfort standpoint, medieval candles were a failure. They did not improve quality of life. They introduced smoke, soot, and smell into already cramped spaces. They blackened walls and ceilings. They made breathing worse. Some people even believed that candle smoke contributed to illness. They were probably right. But candles survived because they solved a problem nothing else could. They produced portable light. Oil lamps existed, but they required oil, careful handling, and steady surfaces. Candles could be carried, set down anywhere, extinguished and relit. They were flexible. They were also deeply symbolic. Candlelight was associated with safety, presence, and human activity. A lit candle meant someone was awake, watching, praying, working. Darkness meant absence, danger, death. So even when candles made life worse in some ways, they made it possible in others. This is where the failure becomes interesting. Medieval candles failed as comfort products, but succeeded as emotional ones. They created a sense of control over the night, a small circle of light pushing back against something vast and unknown. That mattered more than smell. People adapted in small ways. They trimmed wicks carefully to reduce smoke. They mixed fats to improve burning. They saved better candles for special occasions. Churches filled their spaces with beeswax, turning clean light into a sign of holiness. Homes, meanwhile, accepted the stink. Candle use became routine. The smell became familiar. It blended with smoke from hearth fires, animals kept indoors, and unwashed clothing. In a world that already smelled intense, candles were just one more layer. No one expected better, and this lack of expectation allowed candles to survive their failure. Over time, candles shifted roles. As better lighting options slowly appeared, candles became less about necessity and more about mood. By the time gas and electric lighting arrived, candles had already begun their transformation. They stopped being practical. They became atmospheric. This is where the medieval failure becomes visible in the modern world. We still use candles, but not because they are the best way to light a room. We use them because they feel calm, warm, intentional. We associate them with rest, reflection, and comfort. None of that would make sense to a medieval person coughing in a smoke-filled room. But the object survived by changing meaning. Modern candles are refined versions of a flawed ancestor. Clean waxes, stable flames, controlled scents. The smell is now the point, not the problem. Yet the basic form is unchanged. A wick, a solid fuel, a flame. The medieval candle did not disappear when it failed to be pleasant. It endured by being necessary, then lingered long enough to be reinvented as optional. There is also something deeply ironic here. For medieval people, candlelight represented work, effort, and expense. Burning a candle meant consuming a resource. Time and labor melted away drop by drop. People were careful with light. For us, candlelight represents slowing down. We light candles to relax, to rest, to escape bright screens and constant illumination. We recreate the glow of medieval evenings, minus the smell and the coughing. We romanticize what they endured, and that is the final twist of this failure. Medieval candles were bad at being pleasant, but excellent at being memorable. They shaped how night felt, how rooms looked, how time passed after sunset. That sensory memory traveled forward. So when you light a candle today and feel calmer, you are responding to a very old signal, one created by a product that once failed to deliver comfort, cleanliness, or health. A product that smelled worse than darkness, and yet it survived, not because it worked well, but because it worked enough. Glass looks fragile to us now, but predictable. If a glass breaks today, we know why. It fell. It hit the wrong surface. It was thin. The rules are clear. Medieval glass followed no such rules. Medieval glassware was unpredictable in a way that made it quietly dangerous. Glass existed in the Middle Ages, but it was nothing like the uniform, smooth, dependable material we know today. It was handmade, blown or molded by craftsmen working with inconsistent heat, uneven materials, and limited chemical knowledge. Every piece was slightly different. Thickness varied. Air bubbles formed inside. Weak points hid beneath the surface. A cup might survive years of use, then shatter without warning. From a practical standpoint, this made glassware a failure. It was expensive to produce, easy to break, and unreliable in daily life. For most people, glass was simply not worth the risk. Wood, clay, horn, and metal were sturdier, cheaper, and easier to replace. A wooden cup might crack, but it would not explode into sharp fragments at dinner. Glass failed the medieval test of usefulness. So why did it survive? Because medieval glass succeeded at something else entirely. It was beautiful. Glass caught light in a way no other material could. In candlelight, it shimmered. It bent flames into soft shapes. Colored glass glowed. Even clear glass, imperfect as it was, felt almost magical. It turned light into something solid that mattered deeply in a world with little illumination. Glassware also carried status. Owning glass meant you had access to skilled craftsmen and long trade networks. Ingredients like soda ash and certain minerals had to be sourced carefully. Finished pieces often traveled far before reaching a household. Using glass was a statement. It said you could afford fragility. This is an important idea in medieval material culture. Fragile objects signaled wealth because only people with resources could replace them. Durability was practical. Fragility was luxury. But even among the wealthy, glass failed as an everyday object. Goblets cracked from temperature changes. Bowls chipped easily. Washing glass in hot water could ruin it. One careless movement could turn a prized item into glittering debris on the floor. And medieval floors were not forgiving. Stone, tile, packed earth. Glass did not bounce. This led to an odd relationship with glassware. It was admired, displayed, and occasionally used, but often avoided for daily tasks. It hovered on the edge of usefulness, never quite crossing into necessity. In some households, glass was brought out only for guests. In others, it was used ceremonially. Drinking from glass could mark a special moment, a celebration, a ritual, a demonstration of refinement. This kept glass alive, despite its failures. Glass also found safer roles. Instead of being used constantly, it became something to look at. Windows, decorative vessels, religious objects, stained glass, especially turned glass from a fragile risk into a protected surface. Once set into stone, it could no longer be knocked over, and in that form, glass thrived. Medieval stained glass is one of the most successful uses of an otherwise failed material. Thick lead lines held pieces together. Colors told stories. Light became sacred. The same material that shattered in homes survived for centuries in cathedrals. This shift reveals the core failure. Medieval glass failed as a practical household product because it demanded conditions medieval life could not provide. Smooth surfaces, controlled temperatures, careful handling, these were luxuries. But the idea of glass did not fail. The idea was too powerful. Transparency alone was revolutionary. Seeing liquid inside a container, watching light pass through an object, these experiences were rare and captivating. They suggested clarity, purity, and truth. No wonder glass became associated with religion and authority. Over time, glassmakers learned, slowly, painfully, trial by shattered trial. Recipes improved. Technique spread. Uniformity increased. But for centuries, glass lingered as a failure, not abandoned, not fully embraced, just present enough to matter. And this lingering changed how we think about glass today. We still treat glass differently from other materials. We handle it carefully. We associate it with cleanliness and visibility. We use it when we want to see what is inside. We trust it to be neutral, even though it can still break and cut. That trust was earned over time. But it began with failure. Medieval glassware taught people caution. It taught respect for materials. It taught that beauty often comes with risk. Those lessons shaped how glass was used, improved, and eventually mastered. There is also a quiet irony here. Modern glass is so reliable that we forget how strange it is. A solid you can see through, a surface that separates without blocking light. We take this for granted. Medieval people did not. For them, glass always carried a hint of danger, a reminder that some materials do not forgive mistakes, that fragility has consequences. So when a medieval glass cup shattered at a feast, it was not just an inconvenience, it was a small spectacle, a moment of sharp noise and scattered light, a reminder that luxury could bite back. And yet, no one decided glass was a bad idea. They decided it needed time. That is the pattern we keep seeing. Medieval products rarely vanished because they failed. They survived because their core idea was compelling enough to endure discomfort, risk, and inconvenience. Glassware failed completely as an everyday medieval product, but it succeeded as a promise of clarity, of light, of refinement. That promise traveled forward through broken cups and cautious hands until it reached a world that could finally support it. And now, glass sits everywhere around us. Windows, screens, cups, bottles, lenses. We live surrounded by a medieval failure that eventually learned how not to break, quietly, over centuries, one shattered goblet at a time. Color mattered in the medieval world far more than comfort ever did. What you wore told people who you were, where you belonged, and how seriously you should be taken. Color signaled wealth, profession, morality, and status. It could mark celebration or shame. In some cities, it was even regulated by law. The problem was that medieval dyes were terrible at being dyes. Most colors came from plants, insects, or minerals. Roots were boiled, leaves were crushed, insects were dried and ground, fabrics were soaked, stirred, wrung out, and left to dry in open air. The results were unpredictable. 2 garments dyed from the same recipe could look completely different, and the colors rarely stayed. Plant-based dyes faded quickly. Sunlight bleached them, washing weakened them, sweat altered them. A deep blue could turn pale in months. A rich red might bleed into everything it touched. Bright yellow could vanish almost entirely after a few cleanings. From a practical standpoint, this was a failure. People invested time, labor, and money into clothing that did not hold its appearance. Status literally washed away. A garment that once announced wealth could quietly slip into mediocrity. But people kept dyeing their clothes anyway, because color mattered more than durability. In a world where most clothing was brown, gray, or undyed, even fading color was better than none at all. A garment did not need to last forever. It only needed to signal something now. For festivals, church, court appearances, or public life, color was a performance. There was also hope involved. Dyers promised strong colors. Recipes were guarded secrets. Failures were blamed on fabric quality, water, weather, or improper care, rarely on the dye itself. And then there were the dangerous dyes. Some of the most vibrant medieval colors came from minerals. Greens made with copper compounds, reds enhanced with mercury-based cinnabar, yellows derived from arsenic-rich substances. These dyes produced intense, lasting colors. They also produced sickness. Clothing dyed with toxic minerals could irritate skin, cause rashes, and over time contribute to serious illness. Dyers themselves suffered greatly. Their hands cracked, their lungs burned, their lives were often short. Yet these dyes were prized because they worked. They did what plant dyes often could not. They stayed bright. They resisted fading. They impressed. So here is the failure. Medieval dyes failed at being safe, reliable, and consistent. They either faded too quickly or poisoned the people who wore and made them. And still, they were used constantly. This tells us something important about medieval priorities. Durability mattered less than meaning. Safety mattered less than visibility. A bright garment, even if short-lived or harmful, was worth it because it placed you correctly in the social world. A dull garment did not. There was also no clear understanding of chemical danger. Illness caused by dyes was slow and indirect. Skin irritation could be blamed on bad humors. Long-term poisoning was invisible. The color, meanwhile, was obvious and immediate. Immediate benefits won. Over time, people tried to control the failures. Mordants were added. Substances like alum helped dyes bind better to fabric. Techniques improved slightly. Colors lasted a bit longer. But the core problems remained. Dyeing was messy, unstable, risky. Yet the idea of colored clothing never went away. Because color is language. Even as medieval dyes failed chemically, they succeeded culturally. They allowed people to communicate identity without speaking. They reinforced hierarchy. They made life visually structured in a chaotic world. And that idea was too powerful to abandon. Modern clothing dyes exist because of these failures. Chemists did not invent color from nothing. They tried to fix fading, stop bleeding, remove poison, increase consistency. The medieval problems defined the modern goals. We still care deeply about color fastness. We still complain when clothes fade. We still separate laundry because dyes bleed. These concerns are medieval at their core. There is also something familiar here. Even today, people accept uncomfortable or unhealthy clothing for the sake of appearance. Shoes that hurt, fabrics that irritate, styles that restrict movement. We have better options, yet we still choose symbolism over comfort. That choice is old. Medieval people stood in dyed garments that smelled of plants, smoke, or chemicals, knowing the color might not last. They wore stains that ran in the rain. They accepted itching, fading, and even sickness because color placed them in the world. And in a rigid society, placement mattered. So medieval dyes failed as technology, but succeeded as social tools. They did not need to be perfect. They only needed to be visible. That visibility carried forward. Today, color surrounds us. Clothing, branding, uniforms, fashion cycles. We live in a world saturated with color, much of it cheap, stable, and safe. But the desire itself is medieval. The longing to be seen, to stand out, to signal who we are without saying a word. That longing survived arsenic greens and bleeding reds. It survived faded blues and poisoned dyers. It survived because people were willing to endure failure for meaning. So the next time you notice a shirt losing its color in the wash, you are seeing a very old problem, one that once came with far greater risks, a problem that medieval people lived with daily. Their dyes failed completely by modern standards, but they never failed to matter, and in the end, that was enough to keep color alive. Buttons feel so obvious today that it is hard to imagine clothing without them. They are small, quiet, reliable. They do one job, and do it well, which makes it even stranger that, for a long time, buttons were very bad at being buttons. In the medieval world, buttons existed long before they were useful. Early buttons were decorative objects, small metal, bone, wood, or fabric-covered shapes sewn onto clothing purely for display. They sparkled, they showed craftsmanship, they added texture and status, but they did not fasten anything. From a functional point of view, this makes no sense. Why invent a small object, sew it carefully onto clothing, and then not use it to close that clothing? Because medieval clothing already had solutions. Belts, ties, pins, laces, brooches. These methods worked. They were adjustable. They could handle thick fabrics. They were familiar. Buttons, by contrast, were awkward. Early medieval garments were loose and layered. There was no need for tight closures. Clothing was draped, wrapped, or belted. A row of tiny buttons would have added effort without much benefit, so buttons failed to find a purpose. They sat there, shiny and pointless. When buttonholes did begin to appear, they introduced new problems. Cutting holes into fabric weakened it. Button sizes were inconsistent. Fastening many small buttons took time. Cold fingers struggled. Buttons popped off easily and were hard to replace. Pins and ties were faster. So once again, buttons failed. They were slow, fiddly, fragile, and often unnecessary. Yet buttons spread anyway. Why? Because they looked good. Buttons allowed tailors to decorate clothing in new ways. They could be made from precious metals, carved bone, or brightly dyed fabric. A line of buttons down a sleeve or chest signaled wealth and attention to detail. The more buttons you had, the more labor had gone into your clothing, and labor was status. Some garments featured dozens of buttons that did nothing at all. They were sewn permanently in place, purely for appearance. The clothing beneath was still held together by hidden ties or pins. From a modern perspective, this is absurd. From a medieval perspective, it made perfect sense. Clothing was a language, buttons were words. They said, this garment was made carefully. They said, I can afford decoration. They said, I belong in this space. Function was secondary. This is where the failure becomes clear. Buttons failed as fasteners but succeeded as symbols. They existed in a strange limbo, not solving a problem, but hinting at a future solution. Over time, tailoring changed. Clothing became more fitted. Sleeves tightened, bodices narrowed. Men's clothing, in particular, began to cling more closely to the body. Suddenly, the old methods were less effective. Belts could not shape a sleeve. Pins shifted. Ties loosened. Buttons, useless as they had been, were waiting. Buttonholes improved. Placement became more intentional. Buttons began to actually close garments instead of just decorating them. The failure slowly corrected itself. But this took centuries. For a long time, people tolerated buttons that made dressing slower and more annoying. They accepted rows of tiny fastenings that required help from servants or family members. Clothing became something you could not easily put on alone, and people accepted this because the look mattered. There is something very familiar here. Even today, we accept clothing that is uncomfortable or impractical because it looks right. Tiny buttons on cuffs, decorative fastenings that serve no purpose, shoes with laces that never need to be tied because they are sewn in place. We still use fake buttons. That habit is medieval. The button's failure also reveals something about innovation. New ideas do not always arrive fully formed. Sometimes they arrive badly, awkwardly, and without a clear use. They linger as decoration or novelty before becoming essential. Buttons did not replace older fasteners immediately. They sat alongside them, coexisting, competing, being ignored. But once clothing styles changed enough, the button suddenly made sense, and then it took over completely. Today, buttons are everywhere. Shirts, pants, jackets, bags, furniture. They are so common that we barely notice them. Yet they descend from an object that spent centuries failing to justify its existence. There is also humor in this failure. Imagine explaining to a medieval tailor that one day, people would mass-produce millions of identical buttons, that they would be cheap, uniform, and used on almost every garment. that entire factories would exist just to make small, round fasteners. They would likely laugh. Buttons were fiddly nonsense, annoying little decorations that fell off and got lost. Children swallowed them, animals chewed them, sewers cursed them, and yet, here we are. The medieval button also teaches us something about patience. People did not throw buttons away just because they were inefficient. They tolerated them, decorated with them, played with the idea until it finally became useful. That tolerance allowed refinement. Without centuries of decorative buttons, there would have been no pressure to improve buttonholes, spacing, materials, or durability. Failure provided time to learn. This is a pattern we keep seeing. Medieval products often failed because the world around them was not ready. The idea arrived before the conditions that would make it work. Buttons needed fitted clothing. Fitted clothing needed new tailoring techniques. Those techniques needed time. So buttons waited, quietly, pointlessly, shining on sleeves. When we think of medieval failures, we often imagine stupidity or ignorance. But this was not that. It was experimentation without a roadmap, trying ideas in the only way possible. Slowly, publicly, and imperfectly, buttons were not rejected. They were tolerated until they found their place. And even now, their decorative past has not disappeared. Many modern buttons still exist purely for appearance. Suit sleeves with fake cuffs, jackets with buttons that never open, details that echo a time when buttons were more about display than use. Those buttons are ghosts. They remind us that the object we rely on today was once a fashion mistake sewn into history, a small, round failure that eventually learned how to hold things together. For most of human history, losing your eyesight meant losing your place in the world. Reading became impossible. Fine work slowed, faces blurred, details disappeared, and there was no gentle way to explain why this was happening. It was often blamed on age, divine will, or the body simply wearing out, like an old tool. So when eyeglasses appeared in the medieval world, they should have been a miracle. Instead, they were mostly a disappointment. Early medieval eyeglasses emerged around the late 1200s, and they were astonishing in concept. Two pieces of glass, shaped into lenses, held in front of the eyes to correct vision. The idea was bold, clever, and ahead of its time. The execution, however, was terrible. Medieval eyeglasses were crude convex lenses, designed only to help with farsightedness, which mostly affected older readers. There were no prescriptions, no measurements, no understanding of individual vision differences. You did not get glasses made for your eyes. You got glasses. If they helped a little, that was considered a success. Lenses were thick, uneven, and often distorted. Glassmaking was still imprecise, so lenses could warp images, bend lines, and strain the eyes. Reading through them for long periods caused headaches, dizziness, and nausea. Some people reported that the cure felt worse than the problem. Frames were just as awkward. Early glasses were not worn on the face the way we wear them now. They had no arms to hook over the ears. Instead, they were balanced on the nose, pinched in place, or held by hand. Keeping them steady required constant effort. This made working while wearing them difficult. Imagine trying to read, write, or sew while holding your glasses in place with one hand. For many people, it simply was not worth it. Glasses slipped, fell, broke, or were dropped into firelight and shattered. From a usability standpoint, medieval eyeglasses were a clear failure. They were uncomfortable, fragile, limited in who they helped, and often made vision worse instead of better. So why did they survive? Because when they worked, even a little, they changed everything. For scholars, monks, scribes, and merchants, reading was life. Being able to read for a few more years meant staying useful, staying respected, staying employed. A pair of glasses that helped marginally was better than none at all. This meant people tolerated the flaws. They accepted headaches. They adjusted posture. They squinted through distortion. They used glasses briefly, then rested. They adapted their behavior around the failure. And crucially, glasses carried status. Wearing eyeglasses signaled learning, intelligence, authority. You see medieval paintings where scholars are shown with glasses perched on their noses, even when they might not have been using them actively. Glasses became a visual shorthand for wisdom. That symbolism mattered. It meant glasses were not judged solely on performance. They were judged on what they represented. Knowledge made visible, age made respectable, study made noble. Even if the glasses barely worked, they looked like they should. There was also no competition. Glasses were the only vision aid available. There were no contact lenses, no surgery, No alternative tools. The choice was simple. Struggle with glasses or struggle without them. Many chose glasses. And slowly, very slowly, improvement happened. Lens grinding techniques became more refined. Shapes became more consistent. Craftsmen noticed that some lenses helped some people more than others. A crude understanding of optics began to form. But for centuries, progress was incremental and uneven. Some people experienced genuine improvement. Others found glasses useless or painful. Stories circulated of glasses ruining eyesight, which likely happened when people used the wrong lenses. But even these stories did not kill the idea, because the idea was too valuable. Helping people see was worth trying, even badly. There is something deeply human in this persistence. Vision loss is frightening. Any tool that promises clarity, even imperfectly, holds power. People will endure discomfort for the chance to see the world sharply again. This pattern repeats throughout history. Early eyeglasses failed as medical devices. They lacked precision. They misunderstood the problem they were trying to solve. They helped only a narrow group and sometimes harmed others. But they succeeded as proof of concept. They proved that vision could be altered by glass. That was enough. Once that door opened, it never closed again. Optics advanced. Lenses diversified. Nearsightedness was addressed. Frames improved. Arms were added. Comfort increased. Reliability followed. But none of that would have happened if medieval people had rejected early glasses outright. They did not. They wore them badly. They complained. They adjusted. They endured. And endurance, once again, mattered more than success. Even today, we see echoes of this medieval failure. Poorly fitted glasses cause headaches. Wrong prescriptions strain eyes. Cheap lenses distort vision. We still talk about getting used to new glasses, accepting a period of discomfort for long-term benefit. That idea is medieval. We accept that seeing better might feel worse at first. The difference is that now we have options. Medieval people did not. For them, eyeglasses were awkward miracles. Annoying, fragile, slightly embarrassing, slightly magical. They made you look old, scholarly, and strange. And yet, they spread. So when you put on glasses today, comfortable and precise, you are wearing the descendant of a product that barely worked at all. A product that caused pain, frustration, and doubt. A product that failed repeatedly, but failed forward. Medieval eyeglasses did not succeed because they were good. They succeeded because the problem they addressed was unbearable without them. Seeing mattered more than comfort. Clarity mattered more than ease. And so people balanced thick glass on their noses, squinted through distortion, and read by candlelight anyway, because even broken clarity was better than darkness. And that belief carried eyeglasses across centuries of failure, straight into the world we live in now. Medieval furniture looked solid, thick wood, heavy legs, iron brackets. At a glance, it appears sturdy, even intimidating. The kind of furniture that feels like it will outlast you. And sometimes it did. But just as often, it collapsed, splintered, pinched fingers, or quietly hurt the people who used it every day. Medieval furniture had a problem. It was built for survival, not comfort, and sometimes not even for safety. Most medieval homes did not have much furniture at all. Space was limited. Materials were expensive. Everything had to earn its place, so furniture was expected to do many jobs at once. A bench might be a seat by day and a bed by night. A chest might store clothes, serve as a table, and act as a step stool. A stool might be dragged everywhere and used by everyone. This pressure to multitask created designs that were, frankly, bad at everything. Benches were long and backless. They encouraged bad posture and offered no support. Stools were often three-legged, uneven, and unstable on rough floors. Chairs with backs existed, but they were symbols of authority, not everyday items. Most people never sat in one. And then there were the joints. Medieval woodworking lacked the precision tools we take for granted. Joints were often loose or over-tightened. Pegs swelled or shrank with humidity. Iron nails rusted and expanded inside wood, causing cracks. A bench that seemed solid one day could give way the next. There are records of stools collapsing beneath people, benches snapping under weight, and tables tipping without warning. Injuries were common. Bruised hips, twisted ankles, splinters embedded deep into skin. Furniture was not neutral. It fought back. From a modern perspective, this is a design failure. Furniture is supposed to support the body, not challenge it. But medieval furniture was not designed with ergonomics in mind. Comfort was rarely a priority. Endurance was. If a bench lasted 10 years but made you sore every day, that was acceptable. If a stool occasionally collapsed but was easy to replace, that was a trade-off people lived with. And they did live with it, because alternatives were limited. Soft furniture barely existed. Cushions were stuffed with straw, feathers, or rags. Padding shifted and flattened quickly. Upholstery was expensive and difficult to clean. Chairs with armrests or contoured backs were rare and reserved for elites. Most people sat on hard surfaces. They leaned, they slouched, they endured. This had long-term effects: posture problems, joint pain, chronic discomfort. These were normal parts of life. No one blamed the furniture. They blamed aging, labor, fate. Furniture, like many medieval products, was shielded from criticism by expectation. Life hurt. Furniture was part of life. There was also the issue of mobility. Medieval furniture was often designed to be moved frequently. Homes were multifunctional spaces. Tables were set up for meals and taken down afterward. Beds were dismantled. Benches were dragged closer to fires. This constant movement weakened joints and stressed materials. Furniture was not meant to stay still. It was meant to adapt. And adaptation comes at a cost. Folding stools pinched fingers, hinges snapped, collapsible tables failed at the worst moments. The more flexible a piece was, the more likely it was to injure someone eventually. So why did these designs persist? Because they matched medieval life. Furniture that could be moved, stacked, or repurposed fit a world where space was limited and daily routines changed with the seasons. Comfort was negotiable. Flexibility was not. This is where the failure becomes subtle. Medieval furniture failed as a health product. It damaged bodies over time. It caused injuries. It offered little support. But it succeeded as a survival tool. It did not demand a specific posture or environment. It worked anywhere. Poor floors, crowded rooms, uneven ground. Modern furniture assumes a controlled space. Flat floors, stable temperatures, predictable use. Medieval furniture assumed chaos, and chaos won. There is also a social layer to this failure. Chairs with backs were symbols of power. Lords sat, others stood or perched. The phrase "taking a seat" was not casual, it was political. Furniture reinforced hierarchy. In this system, discomfort was not accidental. It was structural. Benches without backs discouraged lingering. Stools without arms prevented relaxation. Only certain bodies were meant to rest fully. Everyone else stayed alert, upright, ready. Furniture shaped behavior. That behavior carried forward. Even today, we see echoes of medieval furniture logic. Benches in public spaces designed to discourage lying down. Seats that are uncomfortable on purpose. Furniture that controls how long you stay. That idea is medieval. Over time, furniture improved. Joinery became stronger. Designs became more body-aware. Cushions improved. Chairs spread beyond the elite. Comfort slowly became acceptable, but the core forms remained. The bench, the stool, the chest, the table. We still use them, and we still accept discomfort in certain contexts because it feels normal. Sitting too long hurts. Hard seats are expected in some places. We joke about bad chairs ruining backs. That tolerance is inherited. Medieval furniture did not fail loudly. It failed quietly, through sore muscles and minor injuries. It shaped bodies and habits without ever being questioned. People did not demand better chairs. They adjusted themselves. This pattern shows up again and again in medieval material culture. Products that hurt people survived because people adapted to the pain instead of rejecting the product. And adaptation allowed time. Time allowed improvement. Today, we sit in chairs designed to support spines medieval people did not even conceptualize. Yet the basic shapes remain. The ideas persist. We are still negotiating comfort versus durability, flexibility versus stability. When a modern chair collapses, we are shocked. When a medieval bench collapsed, it was unfortunate but expected. That difference says a lot. It reminds us that safety standards are cultural, not universal. Medieval furniture failed by our standards, but met theirs well enough to endure. And that endurance is why you are sitting right now. Probably on something that descends directly from a design that once pinched fingers, bruised hips, and splintered without warning. Furniture that hurt people. Furniture that failed. Furniture that stayed. Because, in the medieval world, survival came first. Comfort arrived much later. Medieval kitchens were busy, smoky places filled with sound, heat, and routine. Pots hung over open fires, stews simmered for hours, bread baked daily. Cooking was not occasional, it was constant, and almost everything that touched food came with a quiet risk, because much of medieval cookware was slowly poisoning the people who used it. This was not obvious. No one dropped dead after a meal and pointed at the pot. The danger worked slowly, over months and years, blending into the background of everyday illness, which made it very hard to blame the cookware. One of the biggest problems was lead-glazed pottery. Glazing made pots smoother, less porous, and easier to clean. It helped liquids stay inside vessels instead of seeping into the clay. Lead-based glazes produced a glossy finish that looked refined and professional. They also lowered the melting point of glazes, making pottery easier to produce. From a craftsman's perspective, lead was helpful. From a human body's perspective, it was disastrous. When acidic foods like wine, vinegar, or fruit stews were cooked or stored in lead-glazed pots, lead slowly leached into the food. The taste often did not change. Sometimes it even improved. Sweetness could increase slightly, which made the food more appealing. People ate it happily. Over time, symptoms appeared: stomach pain, fatigue, confusion, mood changes, weakness, in severe cases, paralysis or death. But these symptoms were vague. They overlapped with countless other conditions. No one traced them back to the cookware. Why would they? The pot looked fine. It worked. Food cooked properly. The problem was invisible. Copper cookware posed another risk. Copper is an excellent conductor of heat. It warms quickly and evenly. Medieval cooks valued it for this reason. Large copper cauldrons were common in wealthier kitchens, monasteries, and communal cooking spaces. But bare copper reacts with acidic foods, producing toxic compounds. To make copper safer, it needs to be lined with another metal, like tin. Medieval cooks sometimes did this, but linings wore away quickly. Retinning was expensive and required skilled labor. Many pots were used long past the point of safety. Once again, poisoning happened quietly. Symptoms built up slowly. Illness was blamed on food quality, bad air, or divine testing. Cookware remained innocent. From a modern perspective, this is a catastrophic product failure. Cookware is supposed to be safe. It should not turn meals into long-term health risks. But medieval people did not evaluate products this way. They evaluated results. Did the pot cook food? Yes. Did it last for years? Yes. Did everyone else use similar pots? Yes. That was enough. There was also a strong element of trust in materials. If something was widely used, it was assumed to be acceptable. The idea that a common household object could cause harm without immediate signs was difficult to grasp. Even today, we struggle with this idea. Medieval cooks also lacked alternatives. Clay pots without glaze absorbed flavors and liquids, cracked icily, and were harder to clean. Iron pots rusted and required constant care. Wood burned. Stone was heavy and fragile. Every option had drawbacks. So people chose what worked best most of the time. And most of the time, lead-glazed pottery worked. This reveals an important pattern. Medieval products often failed, not because they were badly designed, but because their dangers operated on timescales people could not easily perceive. Immediate harm was obvious. Long-term harm was abstract. A pot that burned your hand would be rejected. A pot that made you sick slowly would be trusted. Cooking itself also complicated things. Food was often boiled for long periods, which reduced some risks but increased others. Stews concentrated whatever chemicals leached into them. Broths were reused. Liquids sat in pots for days. The cookware became part of the food, and still, no one suspected it. There is a quiet tragedy here. People took pride in their kitchens. Pots were valuable. They were handed down, repaired, and cherished. A good pot was a household investment. It represented stability and care. The idea that this object could be harming the family was almost unthinkable. So medieval cookware survived its failure because it fit seamlessly into daily life. It did not challenge beliefs. It did not disrupt routines. It did not cause dramatic, immediate consequences. It failed silently. Over time, knowledge improved. Craftsmen noticed patterns. Certain glazes caused problems. Some regions moved away from lead earlier than others. Linings improved. Technique spread slowly. But this was not a revolution. It was gradual correction. The form of the cookware did not change much. Pots were still pots. Materials were adjusted. Knowledge crept forward. And this is where the medieval failure reaches into the modern world. We still use many of the same materials. ceramic, copper, iron. We have not abandoned them. We have just learned how to make them safer. Even today, concerns remain. Non-stick coatings, heavy metals, chemical leaching. The conversation continues. We still test cookware. We still argue about safety. We still discover risks after widespread use. That mindset is medieval. We accept tools, then study their consequences later. They trusted experience over theory, and experience did not clearly point to cookware as the enemy. A pot that cooked food reliably was a gift, even if it came with hidden costs. So medieval cookware failed as a health product, but succeeded as a survival tool. It allowed food to be cooked safely from immediate dangers. It made calories accessible. It supported communities. It did its job well enough to justify its existence. The harm was real, but invisible. And invisible failures are the hardest to eliminate. This pattern should feel familiar. Even now, we use products for decades before realizing their long-term effects. Plastics, chemicals, fuels. We repeat the same mistake, just with better packaging. Medieval cookware teaches us that failure does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits. So when you cook tonight, using a pot that has been tested, regulated, and certified, you are benefiting from centuries of quiet correction. From generations of people who cooked in vessels that worked just well enough to keep being used. They paid the price, so we would not have to. Their pots did not explode. They did not collapse. They did not taste wrong. They just poisoned slowly. And because of that, they stayed in kitchens for hundreds of years. Another medieval failure. Another survivor. Another reminder that usefulness often outweighs safety until safety finally catches up. Medieval perfume was not really about smelling nice. That is the first thing to understand. It was about survival. Or at least, what people believed survival required. In the medieval world, bad smells were dangerous. They were not just unpleasant. They were thought to carry disease, corruption, and moral decay. A foul odor meant rot. Rot meant sickness. Sickness meant death. So perfume was medicine. And like many medieval medical products, it failed in strange and sometimes ironic ways. Perfumes were made from whatever carried a strong scent. Flowers, yes, but also animal products, resins, spices, and herbs that modern noses would struggle to tolerate. Musk came from glands of animals. Civet came from secretions. Ambergris came from whales. These substances were rare, expensive, and powerful. They did not fade gently. They announced themselves. Then there were herbal mixtures: rosemary, sage, thyme, juniper, garlic, vinegar, sulfur, sometimes all at once. The result was not subtle. Medieval perfumes often smelled sharp, heavy, and overwhelming. They clung to clothing and skin. They mixed with smoke, sweat, and unwashed fabric. Instead of masking odors, they often amplified them. From a modern perspective, these perfumes failed completely as cosmetic products. They did not attract. They did not soothe. They did not create intimacy. They pushed people away. But medieval users were not trying to be attractive. They were trying to be protected. According to miasma theory, disease traveled through bad air. Sweet smells were thought to cleanse the air. Strong scents could overpower corruption. Carrying perfume was like carrying armor for the nose. So people wore pomandas, small containers filled with scented materials. They hung them from belts, held them to their faces, or slept with them nearby. Doctors recommended them. Clergy blessed them. Nobles displayed them as both protection and status. The stronger the scent, the safer you were supposed to be. This led to a strange problem. If everyone smelled aggressively scented, no one smelled pleasant. Perfume stopped being a personal choice and became a defensive measure, a tool. Something endured rather than enjoyed. And yet, people kept using it. Why? Because the fear was stronger than discomfort. The medieval world was full of invisible threats. Plague, fever, sudden illness. People needed something they could do. Perfume was an action, a response. It gave the illusion of control, even when it clearly did not work. During plague outbreaks, perfumers thrived. Recipes grew more extreme. More spices, more resins, more animal products, more burning. Streets filled with thick layered smells. None of it stopped disease. But abandoning perfume would have felt like surrender. There was also a social component. Scent communicated wealth. Exotic ingredients meant trade connections. Rare spices meant money. Even if the smell was harsh, it signaled power and access. So perfume survived as a status product, even as its practical benefits failed. Another layer of failure came from misunderstanding scent itself. Medieval perfumers did not know how smells interacted with the brain. They did not know about evaporation rates, base notes, or balance. They layered strong ingredients and hoped for the best. Sometimes the results were tolerable. Often they were not. Perfumes became heavy, cloying, sticky. They lingered far too long. People complained, quietly. But the idea of perfume did not die. It adapted. Over centuries, the intention shifted. From protection to pleasure. From defense to expression. Knowledge improved. Alcohol replaced oils. Balance replaced brute force. The product survived by becoming something else. This is why modern perfume exists at all. If medieval perfume had been judged purely on comfort or effectiveness, it would have been abandoned. It irritated noses. It failed medically. It often made social interactions worse. But the concept behind it was powerful. Smell matters. Scent affects mood. Odor carries meaning. That idea was correct, even if the execution was terrible. So perfume lived on, quietly shedding its worst qualities over time. There is something very human here. People will tolerate a lot if they believe something is keeping them safe. They will accept discomfort, embarrassment, even ridicule, especially when the threat feels uncontrollable. Medieval perfume was a coping mechanism, and coping mechanisms are hard to kill. Even today, we see echoes of this. Strong air fresheners, overpowering colognes, products that promise protection but mainly overwhelm the senses. We still confuse intensity with effectiveness. We still believe that if something smells strong, it must be doing something important. That belief is medieval. So medieval perfume failed as a medical product. It failed as a cosmetic. It failed as a social lubricant. But it succeeded as a psychological tool. It gave people something to hold, something to breathe, something to trust. And that was enough to keep it alive. Over time, perfumery learned restraint. It learned chemistry. It learned subtlety. But the medieval instinct never disappeared. We still reach for scent when we want comfort, when we want confidence, when we want control over invisible things. The difference is that now, the perfume usually smells better. Usually. So the next time you encounter a fragrance that feels like too much, too strong, too sharp, to present, remember that you are experiencing a long lineage of failure. A product that once tried to fight death with smell, and lost, but stayed with us anyway. Because sometimes, even a failed product can make people feel safer. And in a dangerous world, that feeling is powerful, even if it makes everyone step back a little. Writing in the medieval world was slow, deliberate, and deeply respected. Every word mattered, because every word took effort. Ink was mixed by hand. Quills were cut carefully. Parchment was expensive. A single page could represent hours of labor and the skin of an animal. So when ink failed, it was not just messy, it was tragic. One of the most common inks used throughout the medieval period was iron gall ink. It was dark, rich, and permanent. At least, that is what people believed. Freshly written, it looked perfect. Deep black, sharp lines, professional. It dried quickly and resisted smudging. Scribes loved it. Monasteries relied on it. Governments trusted it. It seemed like a success. But iron gall ink had a hidden problem. It slowly ate the page. The ink was made from tannins, usually extracted from oak galls, mixed with iron salts. When applied to parchment or paper, it reacted chemically with the surface. This reaction created a dark pigment that bonded tightly to the page. Too tightly. Over time, the ink became acidic. It burned through fibers. Letters cracked. Lines spread. Pages weakened. In severe cases, entire sections of text fell out, leaving holes shaped like words. The ink did exactly what it was designed to do, and then it kept going. From a modern perspective, this is a catastrophic failure. Ink is supposed to preserve information, not destroy it. It should fade gently, not attack the medium holding it. But medieval scribes did not see this failure, because it took centuries. In the short term, iron gall ink was superior to alternatives. Earlier inks faded, they washed out, they blurred. Iron gall ink stayed dark for decades. That was more than enough for a medieval lifetime. Books were not expected to last forever. Documents served immediate purposes. Records mattered now, not in 500 years. So the ink was trusted, and once it became standard, it was very hard to replace. Scribes were trained with it. Recipes were copied. Institutions approved it. Authority reinforced its use. Changing ink meant changing habits, and habits were powerful. Even when damage became noticeable, it was often blamed on age, dampness, or poor parchment. The ink was innocent. There is something almost poetic about this failure. The very permanence people wanted caused destruction. The desire to make words last ended up shortening their lives. And still, iron gall ink spread across Europe. It was used for religious texts, legal documents, letters, maps, and scientific notes. Some of the most important works in Western history were written with ink that is actively trying to erase them. Conservators today fight this battle constantly. They stabilize pages, control humidity, neutralize acids, all to slow down a process that began the moment the ink dried. So why did medieval people keep using it? Because it solved immediate problems extremely well. It wrote clearly. It looked authoritative. It resisted casual damage. In a world without photocopies, backups, or digital storage, clarity mattered more than longevity. Also, there were few alternatives that matched its performance. Carbon-based inks were safer but lighter. They rubbed off. They faded. For official documents, that was unacceptable. A legal contract written in faint ink was dangerous. Iron gall ink felt reliable, and reliability is seductive. This is a recurring theme in medieval product failure. Short-term success overshadowed long-term cost. If a tool worked within a human lifespan, it was considered good enough. The future was someone else's problem. There is also a psychological layer here. Writing was sacred. Words carried power. People trusted the materials associated with knowledge. Questioning ink would have felt like questioning the act of writing itself. So the ink survived criticism. It survived damage. It survived centuries. Even today, we still use ink that descends directly from these medieval formulas. Modern inks are safer, more stable, and carefully tested. But the core idea remains: liquid pigment that bonds to a surface. We did not abandon ink because it once failed. We refined it. And that refinement only happened because people kept using the flawed version long enough to notice its consequences. Medieval ink failed as an archival medium. It destroyed what it was meant to protect. But it succeeded as a communication tool. It carried ideas across distances. It allowed administration, religion, science, and art to exist in written form. Without it, history itself would be thinner. So this is a failure with a strange outcome. The ink harmed the page, but saved the message. Even damaged manuscripts still speak. We piece together texts from fragments. We read around holes. We reconstruct meaning. The ink tried to erase itself, and failed. There is something comforting in that. It reminds us that human ideas are resilient. Even when our tools betray us, the intent survives. This chapter of medieval failure also feels uncomfortably modern. We store information on devices that degrade. We use formats that become unreadable. We trust systems without fully understanding their lifespan. We write for now, and we hope someone later can still read it. That hope is medieval. So the next time you write something down, remember that ink is not neutral. It has a history. It has caused damage. It has failed loudly and quietly. And yet, you still trust it. Because some failures are acceptable when the alternative is silence. Medieval ink destroyed pages. But it gave us voices that still whisper across centuries. And that, apparently, was worth the cost. Medieval shoes were not designed for comfort. They were designed for meaning. This is important, because many of them actively harmed the people who wore them, and everyone involved knew it. One of the most famous examples is the poulain, a shoe with an extremely long, pointed toe. In some cases, the toe extended several inches beyond the foot. In extreme fashion circles, it could stretch far enough to require chains or ties to hold it up. Walking in these shoes was difficult. Running was almost impossible. Standing for long periods caused pain. Toes were cramped together. Balance suffered. Feet suffered. Doctors complained. Moralists complained. Laws were passed trying to limit toe length. None of it worked very well. From a functional perspective, these shoes were a disaster. They failed at the basic job of footwear, protecting the foot and allowing movement. But function was not the point. Poulains were status symbols. They signaled wealth, leisure, and social rank. If you could wear shoes that made work impossible, you were clearly not meant to work. Pain became proof. The longer the toe, the higher the status. This created a strange situation where injury was not a design flaw but a feature. Suffering was visible. Discomfort was admired. Shoes became social statements rather than tools. And people followed the trend. Beyond Poulain's medieval footwear had other problems. Shoes were often straight-lasted, meaning there was no left or right distinction. Both shoes were identical. Feet had to adapt to the shoe, not the other way around. Over time, this caused deformities, bunions, crooked toes, uneven wear, chronic pain. But again, this happened slowly. Slow pain was normal. Most people accepted sore feet as part of life. Hard labor, long walking distances, and uneven roads made discomfort inevitable. Shoes that added to the problem did not stand out as uniquely harmful. There were also material issues. Leather quality varied widely. Poor tanning led to stiff, abrasive shoes. Seams rubbed directly against skin. Soles were thin and wore out quickly. Repairs were common, but repairs often made shoes worse. And still, people wore them because shoes were expensive, because walking barefoot was dangerous, because social norms mattered more than anatomy. Medieval footwear failed ergonomically, but succeeded culturally. It expressed identity, gender, rank, profession, fashion, belonging, and that made the failure tolerable. Over time, pressure mounted. Practical needs pushed back against fashion. Soldiers, travelers, and workers demanded better designs. Left and right shoes emerged. Toes shortened, soles thickened. Comfort became a consideration, but even then, the silhouette remained. Pointed shoes never fully disappeared. They return regularly in fashion. Modern versions are less extreme, but the idea is the same. Style over comfort, form over function. We still wear shoes that hurt. We still accept discomfort for appearance. We still reshape our feet to fit trends. That instinct is medieval. Footwear shows how failure can persist when pain is normalized. When everyone hurts, no one complains loudly enough to force change. Medieval shoes did not fail suddenly. They wore people down. And because the damage was gradual, it became invisible. There is also something very human about this. Feet are hidden. Pain can be endured privately. Shoes rarely cause dramatic injury. They just make life slightly worse, day after day. Those are the easiest failures to ignore. So medieval footwear survived, not because it was good, but because it was acceptable. It met minimum requirements. It covered the foot. It followed fashion. It signaled belonging. Everything else was secondary. Even today, podiatrists fight centuries of tradition. Wide toe boxes, ergonomic soles, natural movement. The arguments sound modern, but the problem is ancient. We are still undoing medieval mistakes. So when your shoes pinch, or rub, or leave marks at the end of the day, you are participating in a long history of compromise, a choice between comfort and identity. Medieval shoes failed the body, but served society. And society, more often than not, wins. The feet simply adapt, until they cannot. And then we invent better shoes. Eventually, usually after a few centuries. In the medieval world, locks were not really about stopping thieves. They were about making people feel safer. That difference matters, because most medieval locks were astonishingly easy to defeat, not just by experts, but by anyone with basic knowledge, patience, or the right-shaped piece of metal. And yet, locks were everywhere. Chests, doors, gates, cupboards, churches, strong boxes. Even books were sometimes locked shut. Security was visible, reassuring, symbolic. Actual protection was optional. The most common medieval lock design was the warded lock. Inside the lock were fixed metal obstructions, called wards, arranged in a specific pattern. The key was shaped to pass around these wards and turn the bolt. In theory, only the correct key could do this. In practice, almost any key could. Warded locks were defeated by skeleton keys, simple tools shaped to avoid the wards entirely. Blacksmiths could make them easily. Thieves could improvise them. Some people carried them casually. The lock was not broken. It was politely ignored. From a modern standpoint, this is a complete product failure. A lock that does not lock is pointless. It offers no real barrier. It creates false confidence. But medieval users did not expect locks to be invincible. They expected them to slow people down, to mark boundaries, to show intent. A locked chest said, "This is not yours." A locked door said, "Do not enter." If someone broke that boundary, the crime was social as much as physical. Locks worked as moral tools. They provided justification for punishment after the fact. They made theft visible and undeniable. A broken lock or forced entry mattered legally and socially. So the lock's job was not prevention, it was documentation. This is why so many locks were exposed, decorative and external. They were meant to be seen. Ornate keys were symbols of trust and authority. Carrying keys showed responsibility. The act of locking was performative. And in a world where communities were small and reputations mattered, that performance was often enough. Most theft was opportunistic. People stole what was unattended, not what was clearly claimed. A lock discouraged casual theft. It filtered behavior rather than stopping it. That made it useful. There were stronger locks, of course. Some medieval locksmiths were highly skilled. Complex mechanisms existed, but they were expensive, rare, and often reserved for treasuries or royal use. Most people relied on simple locks, and most people accepted their weakness. There is also a technological reason for this failure. Precision metalworking was difficult. Consistency was rare. Locks were handmade. Keys were not standardized. Tolerances were loose. That made security unreliable. A lock that was too precise might jam. A lock that was too tight might break. Simplicity ensured usability, so medieval locks chose reliability over security. They opened when needed. They closed easily. They worked even when dirty, rusted, or misaligned. That mattered more than resisting a determined intruder. The environment shaped the design. Doors were wooden, walls were thin, windows were unglazed, roofs were reachable. If someone wanted to break in, they did not need to pick the lock. They could go around it. So investing heavily in lock security made little sense. The lock was the last layer, not the first. This is another example of medieval failure being deeply contextual. Judged by modern standards, these locks are laughable. Judged by medieval needs, they were adequate. Still, they failed. Keys were copied easily. Some locks used identical wall patterns. Entire towns shared similar designs. A single skeleton key could open dozens of doors. That means privacy was limited. Property security was fragile. Trust carried more weight than hardware, and trust was enforced socially, not mechanically. Over time, this began to change. Cities grew. Populations became denser. Strangers appeared. Property accumulated. Wealth concentrated. The old system strained. Locks became more important. This pressure drove innovation. Tumbler locks, spring mechanisms, hidden wards, internal components. Complexity increased. But the basic medieval lock persisted for a very long time. Why? Because it was familiar, because it was affordable, because it worked just well enough, and because people understood its limitations. This acceptance of limited protection is deeply medieval. Instead of demanding absolute security, people layered solutions. Locks plus witnesses, locks plus dogs, locks plus social surveillance, locks plus fear of punishment. The lock alone was never trusted, and that honesty made its failure tolerable. Modern users expect locks to do more. We want devices that protect us even when society fails. We want security without community. That expectation did not exist in the medieval world. So medieval locks failed to stop theft, but succeeded in structuring behavior. They shaped how people thought about ownership, about boundaries, about responsibility. They also created rituals, locking up at night, handing over keys, counting keys, losing keys, all familiar behaviors today. We inherited those habits. Even now, many locks function more as deterrents than barriers. A determined intruder will get through most residential locks quickly. We know this, and yet, we lock our doors, because the act matters, because the symbol matters, because it tells us that we have done what is expected. That instinct is medieval. Locks also taught people where responsibility lay. If you lost your key, it was your fault. If your lock was open, blame followed. The object carried moral weight. So despite failing technically, locks succeeded socially. They organized trust. They created accountability. They reduced casual harm. That was enough. There is also something quietly ironic here. As locks improved over time, so did methods of bypassing them. Security and theft evolved together. No lock remained secure forever. This was true in the medieval world and remains true today. Absolute security is an illusion. Medieval people understood this intuitively. They did not chase perfection. They chased sufficiency. And sufficiency is a low bar. So medieval locks survived their failure by being honest tools in an imperfect world. They never promised safety. They suggested order. They said, this belongs to someone. And most of the time, that was respected. Today, we still turn keys. We still hear the click. We still feel that small comfort, even knowing it is not absolute. That feeling comes from centuries of habit, from medieval chests that could be opened with the wrong key, from doors that symbolized boundaries more than they enforced them. from a world where trust mattered more than steel. So the next time you lock something, remember that you are participating in a tradition of partial protection, a compromise between fear and practicality. Medieval locks did not truly lock, but they taught us how to live with that fact, and somehow, that lesson lasted longer than the metal itself. Medieval medicine was a curious mix of hope, ritual, observation, and often spectacular failure. Hospitals, apothecaries, and traveling physicians offered remedies that ranged from the mildly comforting to the actively dangerous, and many products that were supposed to heal did exactly the opposite. Bloodletting was one of the most common treatments. The concept was simple. Disease and imbalance in the body were caused by bad blood or an excess of certain humors. Remove some blood, restore balance, and health would return. It sounded reasonable in theory. It felt medical. It looked like action. And in a world with limited understanding of physiology, action was better than nothing. The execution, however, was less reasonable. Doctors used lancets, knives, or specialized bloodletting instruments to remove surprisingly large quantities of blood. Veins were cut with little anesthesia, and sometimes bleeding continued for hours. Weakness, dizziness, and fainting were frequent results. In extreme cases, patients never recovered. Some even died not from their illness, but from the cure. Yet bloodletting persisted for centuries. Why? Because it gave the appearance of care. It offered reassurance to patients and families that something was being done. It also reinforced authority. The physician knew the humors, wielded the knife, and performed a procedure that looked deliberate and complex. Even when patients got worse, it reinforced belief in the process. Misfortune was blamed on divine will or the severity of disease, not on the instrument or the procedure. Herbal remedies were no better in many cases. Apothecaries mixed concoctions of roots, resins, and powders meant to cure fever, inflammation, or plague. Some were mildly effective, like willow bark for pain. Many others were inert. A significant number were toxic. Mercury, arsenic, and lead were all common ingredients, added because they seemed to purge the body or because they were expensive and exotic, signaling efficacy. Consuming them caused nausea, organ failure, and sometimes death. And yet, they remained popular because the procedure was complex, mysterious, and socially validated. The social and psychological factors behind this persistence were fascinating. Authority played a huge role. If a doctor or monk recommended a product, its value was assumed. People trusted tradition, books, prayers, and ritual usage reinforced faith. Failure was never immediate or absolute, so no one could definitively prove the product was useless. This meant even harmful remedies survived for centuries, quietly causing suffering while maintaining legitimacy. Medical tools themselves were often dangerous. Cupping instruments burned or pierced the skin. Leeching often caused infections. Trepanation, drilling holes into the skull, could relieve pressure. Sometimes helped with certain neurological conditions, but more often led to death or permanent injury. And yet, these tools were considered indispensable in a practitioner's kit. They symbolized knowledge, authority, and intervention. Patients often demanded them because doing nothing felt worse than trying something, even if that something might fail. It's important to see how these failures persisted in cultural memory. Even as medical knowledge advanced, some ideas refused to die. The symbolic authority of these products carried forward. Bloodletting persisted well into the 18th century, long after its efficacy was scientifically questioned. Herbal concoctions evolved into modern pharmaceuticals, with chemical extraction and standardization, but their roots are ancient. Medical failures did not vanish. They were refined, systematized, and sometimes methodologized. The paradox is clear. These products failed spectacularly on a functional level, but succeeded culturally. They helped maintain social structures, reinforced hierarchies, and offered psychological comfort. Healing, in the medieval sense, was as much about appearing to act as it was about producing tangible results. This is why so many dangerous remedies survived, sometimes longer than safer, more effective alternatives. The endurance of failed medical products also reflects human tendencies toward hope, trust, and risk management. People accepted harm because the alternative, doing nothing, was terrifying. When the world is unpredictable, visible action matters more than invisible efficacy. In medieval times, visible action often involved blood, herbs, and fire. Risk was tolerated, even encouraged, if it symbolized care and knowledge. Some products were repurposed over time. Tools initially meant for dangerous interventions became instruments of experimentation or education. Herbal ingredients found safe applications in cuisine, perfumery, or cosmetic products. The knowledge encoded in these failures, though flawed, informed later innovations. The trial and error of centuries slowly gave rise to modern medicine, safer pharmaceuticals, and surgical standards that actually help patients rather than harm them. There is a striking modern parallel here. Many contemporary remedies, supplements, and interventions follow the same pattern. Hope and symbolism sometimes outweigh evidence. Pills are consumed because authority recommends them. Advertisements promise results, and social pressure reinforces compliance. Only rigorous testing gradually weeds out harmful or ineffective products, echoing the slow evolution seen in medieval medicine. The psychological aspect of medieval medical failure cannot be overstated. When someone is ill, pain and vulnerability create immense pressure to act. Inaction feels irresponsible, almost morally wrong. Products that fail functionally but succeed socially fill this gap. They allow humans to feel in control, even if the control is illusory. Medieval medicine was full of such illusions, and they were essential to the social fabric. Ultimately, medieval medical products teach a profound lesson. Failure is not always about immediate performance. It is about survival, perception, and adaptation. Bloodletting instruments, toxic remedies, and dangerous tools were failures by functional standards, but survived because they addressed urgent human needs: fear, uncertainty, and the desire for agency. They endured because they worked symbolically, psychologically, and socially. This is why we still see echoes of these failures today. The cautious optimism, placebo effects, ritualized administration, and moral weight associated with medical intervention all have roots in these medieval practices. The tools themselves may be gone, but the human behavior surrounding them persists. Even now, when we receive treatment, we hope for results that may not be immediate or guaranteed. We trust authority, follow ritual, and endure discomfort for the promise of relief. That instinct is medieval. The difference is that modern science often intervenes to ensure the product works functionally as well as symbolically. In essence, medieval medical products failed in one sense, but succeeded in another. They harmed bodies, but preserved social order. They killed or injured, yet maintained trust in physicians. They were often useless or dangerous, but culturally indispensable. And that is the subtle genius of medieval failure: persistence through adaptation, survival through meaning. The products themselves might have been flawed, but the human needs they served were universal and timeless. So when you swallow a pill today, or watch a loved one receive care, remember the centuries of flawed products that preceded this moment. Remember that failure in history is rarely absolute. Sometimes it lingers quietly, shaping expectations, behaviors, and culture. Medieval medical tools were terrible at curing disease. They often injured patients. They sometimes killed. And yet, their legacy survives, not because they were good, but because they addressed human needs no one could ignore: hope, agency, and trust. That endurance is what allowed humanity to reach modern medicine at all. Failure, in the medieval world, was not death. Failure was survival with consequences. It was learning, adaptation, and gradual refinement. It was a product that harmed but stayed, because the world demanded it. And through these failures, we inherited the foundations of the medical systems we rely on today. Sometimes, what fails most spectacularly teaches us the most. Sometimes, failure is the longest-lasting product of all. Medieval medicine, for all its errors and hazards, reminds us that human perseverance often outlives the shortcomings of the tools we create, and that, in its own quiet, strange way, is a form of success. By now, we've wandered through medieval life, examining products that were dangerous, impractical, or outright failures. Toothpaste that wore down enamel, candles that filled rooms with smoke, footwear that crushed toes, and even medical tools that harmed patients. At first glance, it seems shocking that any of these items survived at all, and yet, survive they did. Some in the same form, some evolved beyond recognition, but all left traces that echo into our daily lives. Why? Why did so many failed products persist for centuries, often long after their shortcomings became obvious? The answer is subtle, complex, and surprisingly human. It is a story of culture, adaptation, perception, and necessity, rather than one of mechanics or chemistry. First, context matters. In the medieval world, most products were scarce, expensive, or labor-intensive. Every item had to justify its existence. If it fulfilled a need, Need it was tolerated, even if imperfect. Soap that irritated the skin, ink that slowly destroyed parchment, cookware that leached lead, or shoes that crippled toes, they all worked well enough in some immediate sense. They allowed food to be cooked, words to be written, or people to walk. They were better than nothing. And in a society without mass production, consumer choice, or rapid feedback, good enough often became permanent. Second, adaptation is key. Humans are remarkably flexible. Pain, inconvenience, and danger were often absorbed into daily life rather than rejected. A bruised hip from a collapsing bench, a slowly poisoned stew, or a badly shaped shoe did not immediately eliminate utility. People learned to live with discomfort, develop coping strategies, and adjust expectations. Over generations, these tolerances became normalized. What we might consider a design failure today was simply ordinary life then. Survival required adaptation, not complaint. Third, social reinforcement preserved failures. Products were embedded in culture, fashion, and status. Long-toed palanes marked social rank. Perfumes protected against invisible miasmas. Locks signaled authority and boundaries. Candles and glassware projected wealth. Even a product that failed in its intended function could succeed symbolically. Its meaning, ritual, and social visibility outweighed technical deficiencies. People used items because others did, because tradition endorsed them, or because authority decreed it. Failure became invisible under the weight of cultural significance. Fourth, knowledge lag ensured persistence. Many medieval failures were invisible, gradual, or delayed. Lead-glazed pots slowly poisoned, iron gall ink gradually corroded, and medical tools often harmed over months or years. The human mind naturally struggles to detect harm that is subtle or cumulative. Without scientific methods or systematic testing, causes were misattributed to fate, divine will, or natural weakness. Products that failed over time were therefore tolerated, copied, and perpetuated because the immediate outcome seemed acceptable. Fifth, evolution disguised failure. Many medieval products survived not as static objects, but as prototypes. Tooth powders eventually became safe toothpaste. Iron gall ink inspired modern inks with better chemistry. Warded locks evolved into tumblers and combination locks. Perfumes became refined into modern perfumery. The failure itself seeded innovation. Without the flawed original, the improved version might never have emerged. Failure, in this sense, is generative. It teaches through persistence. And finally, human psychology ensured survival. People are often more motivated by perceived action than by evidence of success. Medieval remedies, perfumes, and tools provided reassurance. To act even, if ineffectively, was comforting. Bloodletting made patients feel attended to. Pomanders made people believe they were protected. Wearing fashionable but harmful shoes showed belonging and status. Perception often outweighed function. This is a pattern still visible today in medicine, fashion, and technology. Products persist because they fulfill emotional, social, or symbolic needs as much as practical ones. Taken together, these factors explain the paradox. Medieval products failed in many senses, yet survived because failure was never absolute. Survival was defined by adaptability, cultural fit, and immediate usefulness rather than perfection. Failure became a feature of continuity, not a mark of obsolescence. The product endured because it addressed human needs, physical, social, and psychological, that were more urgent than flawless function. The legacy of medieval failure reaches into modern life in surprising ways. Furniture still favors simple benches and stools despite centuries of ergonomic knowledge. Clothing retains decorative features that limit function. Perfumes still rely on potent scents to influence mood and perception. Cookware uses materials that are imperfect, but manageable. Even modern medicine echoes medieval strategies of hope, ritual, and authority. Each of these examples carries an invisible lineage of failure that has been refined, not erased. This persistence also teaches an important lesson about history. We often assume that human progress is linear. Better tools replace worse ones, mistakes vanish, and failure is corrected quickly. Medieval products show that the reality is more complicated. Failure is messy, iterative, and layered. It persists quietly, adapts, and sometimes transforms. What seems like a poor design may survive because it fills multiple needs simultaneously: practical, social, psychological, and symbolic. It also teaches humility. We like to think of ourselves as modern, rational, and enlightened, we assume that our tools, medicines, and technologies are vastly superior and unlikely to fail in ways we cannot anticipate. Yet history demonstrates that failure is inevitable, often invisible, and rarely absolute. Just as medieval toothpaste wore down teeth while promising hygiene, just as iron gall ink destroyed pages while preserving words, today's products carry hidden compromises. Our perception of safety, convenience, or efficacy is always provisional. There is something quietly comforting in this perspective. Failure is not shameful. It is natural. It is instructive. It connects us across centuries, reminding us that human ingenuity and tolerance have always been intertwined with risk, compromise, and imperfection. Medieval products did not die because failure is rarely complete. They evolved, they adapted, they persisted, and in doing so, they left a legacy that shapes our modern lives, often in ways we barely notice. In the end, these failures never truly died because they were not meant to die. They served needs beyond the immediate or functional. They fit into routines, reinforced social hierarchies, addressed fears, and gave people a sense of control in an unpredictable world. Their endurance is a testament to human adaptability and resilience. Every time you write with a pen, light a candle, lock a door, wear shoes, or even cook with a pot, you are engaging with a lineage of failures that survived through centuries. Some of them were harmful, some were ridiculous, some were both. And yet, every one of them contributed to the shape of the world we inhabit today. Failure is not the opposite of success. In the medieval world, it was a form of continuity, a mechanism of adaptation, and a quiet engine of progress. By tolerating, refining, and learning from flawed products, medieval people ensured that knowledge, practice, and cultural memory survived. And through that slow, often painful process, humanity inherited not just the objects themselves, but the wisdom to improve upon them. So as you go about your life, notice the subtle echoes of medieval ingenuity and failure in the objects around you. A chair, a pair of shoes, a bottle of ink, a scented candle, a pot on the stove are descendants of experiments that failed spectacularly, persisted quietly, and evolved gradually. They remind us that human progress is rarely immediate, often imperfect, but deeply persistent. And sometimes, the products that fail the most spectacularly are the ones that teach us the most. Failure is never final. It is a path, a teacher, a history that lives in our hands, our homes, and our routines. And in that way, medieval failures continue to exist quietly, invisibly, but always profoundly. As our journey through medieval failures draws to a close, it's worth pausing to reflect on what we've seen. We've wandered marketplaces filled with unsold goods, smelled the acrid smoke of tallow candles, and felt the pinch of long-toed shoes. We've watched as bloodletting instruments, lead-glazed pots, and iron gall ink quietly caused harm, yet survived for centuries. We've seen products that failed in their intended purpose, but endured because they fit social, cultural, and psychological needs. And now, as the day closes and night settles over this quiet medieval landscape, it's time to consider the meaning of all this in our hands today. The medieval world was tactile. People experienced life through touch, smell, and sound more than sight. Their tools were handled daily, often intimately. A pot was lifted, a quill was held, a shoe was tightened. Every failure was felt directly. Every imperfection was tangible. Unlike today, where digital interfaces mediate experience, medieval failures were immediate and unavoidable. And yet, despite or perhaps because of their flaws, they survived. This survival tells us something profound about continuity. Objects that failed in function but succeeded in fitting human needs persisted. Objects that created slow harm but reinforced social order or cultural meaning endured. Objects that were impractical, dangerous, or inconvenient survived because they addressed essential human concerns: comfort, identity, authority, ritual, and hope. The medieval past lives in our hands because failure is not always the end, it is a lesson, a prototype, a foundation. Consider your daily life. The pen you write with, the shoes on your feet, the candle burning softly beside your desk, the ink in your printer, they all carry echoes of medieval experimentation. The risks have been minimized, the forms refined, the materials tested, but the lineage is clear. We use these objects because centuries of trial, error, and adaptation made them what they are, and their predecessors often failed spectacularly. The idea that failure is instructive is deeply human. Medieval products remind us that imperfection is not shameful. It is natural. It is a teacher. Tooth powders destroyed enamel, yet they led to safer toothpaste. Iron gall ink corroded parchment, yet it taught lessons that made modern ink possible. Warded locks were easy to bypass, yet they shaped the psychology of security for generations. Every failure contained the seeds of improvement. We also inherit their subtle lessons in tolerance. Medieval people accepted discomfort and danger as part of life. Shoes pinched, cookware leached toxins, furniture splintered, but people adapted. They compensated, endured, and adjusted expectations. There is wisdom in that endurance. Modern life often exaggerates the need for perfection. Products must be safe, efficient, and instant. But the medieval approach reminds us that survival and adaptation often matter more than flawless execution. Sometimes, getting by is enough. Sometimes, patience and resilience are the solution. There is a gentle irony in this. We are surrounded by objects that are refined, tested, and regulated. Yet the human behaviors that preserved failures persist. We still trust authority, adhere to rituals, and tolerate minor discomfort for perceived benefit. Medicines are taken for hope. Technology is used for convenience. Fashion is worn for status. The medieval world survives in these habits, quietly embedded in our routines. We are heirs to centuries of trial and error. At the same time, we can see the long shadow of consequence. Failures that were once invisible have shaped culture, knowledge, and expectation. The hidden poison in cookware taught chemistry. The subtle damage of shoes informed ergonomics. The corrosive power of ink guided archival science. Every small failure rippled outward, influencing generations in ways the original users could never have imagined. In this sense, failure is not just survival, it is legacy. Medieval failures also teach humility. We like to think of our world as rational, precise, and advanced. But even today, products fail in unexpected ways. Recalls, software glitches, chemical miscalculations, and health scares. History shows that failure is inevitable, often invisible, and rarely final. What medieval people endured reminds us to approach our tools, technologies, and remedies with curiosity, care, and respect. Perfection is rare, progress is gradual, and patience is necessary. There is a poetic symmetry here. Medieval people handled their tools, products, and remedies with attention and care, aware of risk but constrained by necessity. We, centuries later, handle our refined objects with convenience and detachment, often forgetting the failures that made them possible. By considering these failures, we reconnect with the tactile, immediate, and human aspect of daily life. We remember that every object carries a story, a lineage, and lessons learned through trial, error, and adaptation. This reflection brings us to the core idea. Failure is not an endpoint. It is a continuum. It is a narrative that we inherit and shape. Medieval products that failed spectacularly yet survived quietly teach that imperfection can persist, evolve, and inform. They showed that survival often depends on cultural fit, psychological reassurance, and practical adaptation as much as mechanical function. They demonstrate that human ingenuity is intertwined with error, and that learning often requires repeated attempts over generations. And so, as you lay down to rest, or simply pause and reflect on the objects around you, consider the invisible history in your hands. That pen, that candle, that piece of furniture, that pair of shoes, they are the descendants of failures that refused to die. They survived through human patience, adaptation, and creativity. They were flawed, dangerous, inconvenient, or absurd, and yet they endure. By noticing them, we honor the people who used them, adapted to them, and improved upon them. By holding them, we connect to centuries of human experience, innovation, and survival. By understanding their failures, we can approach our own choices with greater awareness and humility. The medieval past is not locked away in books or artifacts, it is alive in our routines, our tools, and our perceptions. And perhaps there is comfort in this continuity. Life is imperfect, tools are imperfect, people are imperfect, yet persistence, adaptation, and care allow us to endure. Objects fail, humans adapt, and culture progresses. The failures of the past are lessons, reminders, and companions. They are quiet, patient, and enduring. So tonight, as you watch a candle flicker, touch a pen, or pull a book from a shelf, remember the medieval failures that paved the way. Remember the tooth powders, candles, locks, shoes, and inks. Remember the bloodletting tools, the perfumes, and the cookware. Each failed product is a story, a teacher, and a bridge connecting centuries of human effort. And in that quiet recognition, perhaps the medieval past feels a little closer, not distant history, but something tangible, immediate, and alive in your hands. Its failures are no longer failures, they are foundations. Its missteps are no longer missteps, they are lessons. Its danger is no longer threatening, it is instructive. This is the enduring power of medieval products that failed completely but still exist in spirit today. They remind us that survival is not perfection, that learning is iterative, and that history is not linear. They remind us that human ingenuity often grows out of miscalculation, that culture preserves what works socially, and that even failure can leave a legacy of beauty, insight, and resilience. In the end, the medieval world touches us every day, not through museums or manuscripts alone, but through the objects we hold, use, and trust. By recognizing the failures embedded in these objects, we honor both the human past and the human present. We see that imperfection is a teacher, continuity is a gift, and survival is a story written quietly across centuries. And as you close your eyes, or simply reflect in stillness, consider this: the tools around you, the products you trust, and even the objects you take for granted are the heirs of failure. They carry lessons that began long ago, in smoky kitchens, crowded marketplaces, and candlelit workshops. They survived not because they were perfect, but because humans found ways to adapt, tolerate, and learn. The medieval past, in all its failures, lives in your hands. It always has, and it always will. And just like that, we've reached the end of our journey through medieval products that failed completely, yet somehow refused to disappear. What began as awkward experiments, impractical designs, or misunderstood ideas slowly evolved into things we still use today. Proof that even history, as big as flops, can leave a lasting mark. If you enjoyed uncovering these forgotten failures, give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you'd like more calm, fascinating history stories like this one. And let me know in the comments which medieval product surprised you the most, or which one you think should have stayed in the Middle Ages. Don't stop here. Check out the videos on screen for more strange inventions, forgotten lifestyles, and the unexpected side of history. Thanks for watching. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next story.